Am I the a-hole for not telling my boyfriend that my son was adopted? I 34F have a 10-year-old son we'll call Arthur. I adopted him when he was 2 as his godparent after his mother passed away and his father was never in the picture. Arthur has always had trouble making friends, but he made a great one this past year, a 10-year-old boy in his grade who we'll call Elliot. I didn't plan on it, but Elliot's father 38M, who we'll call Edward, and I became very close. We come from very different backgrounds. Edward grew up in a stable, high-income home, mostly raising Elliot in Europe until about a year and a half ago when they moved to our area. I grew up in a poor family and was raised by my uncle after my mother died. I had a rough childhood and was involved in crime when I was younger, but I've been on the straight and narrow for Arthur's sake. I didn't want my relationship with Edward to affect Arthur and Elliot's friendship, but after agreeing that the boys would always come first, we began loosely dating about a year ago. A few weeks ago, Arthur got really sick while Edward was watching him. I was an hour away fixing something at a friend's house, and Edward took Arthur to the emergency room when things got worse. His appendix had burst. When I got there, Arthur was in surgery, and he went into anaphylactic shock due to the anesthetic. The doctors started asking about family medical history, and I couldn't provide any information since I'm not biologically related to Arthur. I never knew his mother's family. Edward tried to help, but I panicked and lashed out, saying that Arthur wasn't my biological son. Edward walked away to give me space. Arthur's fine now, but he had some complications and spent a few weeks in the hospital. Since then, Edward and I have barely spoken because of an argument that followed. Edward was upset that I hadn't told him Arthur was adopted. I can understand why, but it never came up and I didn't see the point in mentioning it. I wasn't hiding it, but I didn't have concrete plans to tell him either. The situation escalated, and we both said hurtful things. I brought up Elliot's mother, who I knew nothing about. I didn't really care about her, but I made it seem like I did. From what I knew, Edward had raised Elliot on his own. I feel like our situations are similar, but Edward insists they're different. He says it's relevant that Arthur isn't biologically mine, but I don't think it changes anything. I didn't want Arthur to know he was adopted before he could fully understand. We've never had an argument like this before. The only time we had a similar conversation was when I told him about my past. I felt like that was relevant because it directly involved me. He was understanding then, and there wasn't nearly as much conflict. Now, I'm unsure if not telling him about Arthur was the right decision. He's a kind man, but this caught me off guard, and we both said things we regret. Am I the a-hole for not telling my boyfriend my son is adopted?
Here are the top comments.
Not the a-hole. At this point, Arthur is your child. You are his mom. The details are nobody else's business. Besides, it's not like you hid this from Edward. It just never came up because it doesn't sound like you even think about it anymore, which makes you a great adoptive mother. I mean, he's been in your life almost a decade, and I suspect that you aren't thinking every day, adopted, adopted, adopted. Why would you even share that with Edward? I mean, maybe you would if it came up or if you happened to be talking about that period of your life, or maybe it wouldn't. Either way, I just don't see the problem.
You're the a-hole. Your son is far too old not to know his adoption story. We start telling babies before they are verbal. Your choice, if true, is a and will cause him because he is so old. You need to find a family therapist immediately and work with them to tell this boy his history right away and help him process his birth mother's death. I don't care about this boyfriend of yours, but his attitude about adoption is gross.